Welcome to today's Threading Thoughts, which talks about the life sciences entrepreneurship and some critical key aspects in times of the pandemic, a one in 100-year event. Many have realized the value of life sciences and biotechnology. While many entrepreneurs want to support the community in this space, there are some elements that differentiates life science entrepreneurship from running other enterprises. It could be capital and capex intensive, finding and retaining rare to find talent, crossing several layers of regulatory checkpoints, the high risk of failure, and many, many more. But if an entrepreneur could focus on 6 key aspects, it definitely increases the chances of getting through all these much higher. Shriram Raghavan is presently the Senior Vice President at Jananome, India's first company to offer synthetic biology as a service, and he has over 2 decades of experience in building 6 startups in life sciences and operated in 28 countries around the world. He is also the founder of 2 other startups. One is a California-based company, eLive Biotherapeutics, working on the world's first program, Live Biotherapeutics for lung cancer, and another Indian company, Natural Nutrition, for vegan meal replacer. He was previously the vice president at the Swiss-headquartered synthetic biology company, Evolva Biotech. He lends his support to more than 60 startups along the east coast of India and advises many technology incubators such as the Golden Jubilee Biotech Park Chennai, KIIT TBI Bhubaneswar, RCB BSc Faridabad, VCR Park Vizag. He is also on board of some investment committees with incubators such as E-Idea NAM, Hyderabad, VIT Vellore, and also a jury member for BIRAC, Government of India Enterprise, to fund biotech startups. He is now part of AICTE committee to formulate a model curriculum for BTech courses in biotechnology to introduce entrepreneurship to students at an early stage. He was recently elected as the Executive Council member of ABLE or ABLE, Association of Biotech-Led Enterprises, an association comprising of more than 1,000 biotech companies of India. We're so glad to welcome Mr. Shriram Raghavan to this podcast and this episode of Threading Thoughts. It's really great to have you with us. We do know you're quite busy and you have multiple, interests tugging you at different directions. But thank you so much for taking time off and talking to us actually about a very, very important topic that's come about. I think more so relevant in COVID times. Thank you so much, Shriram, for joining us.
Thank you, Vidula, for having me here. It's a very important day today. The 25th of April is world over celebrated as the World DNA Day. So this is the day on which the DNA's double helix structure was revealed to mankind. And this is also the day when more than 80% of the human genome was annotated by both the teams in 2003. So it's a very significant day, and thanks for choosing this important day. And as we go through a very difficult time of COVID, and also the significance of what just genome sequence can do from a vaccine standpoint, and I think you have identified the right day and the right theme for today in terms of what we're going to talk about on the life science entrepreneurship. So let me know in terms of what is it, how is it that we are going to discuss today.
Sure. I mean, it's wonderful that you brought this up, and significance cannot be underlined even more. These are particularly very, very difficult times that we live in. And more so in the last, say, 1.5 years, we thought this would get over by February, March is what our thoughts were. It doesn't seem like it. It seems to be getting worse, in fact. And, mutated strains, lack of oxygen cylinders, struggling patients, and, vaccine development. There's just so many different ways healthcare has actually sort of try to pull up its boots and help citizens. So, and I also think this is a very, very important time for us to sort of think on our feet, be agile, think of new ideas, and perhaps even help entrepreneurs with ideas that can help us at this particular point of time to come up with, some scalable solutions. So perhaps you can, talk us through this particular area and given your bird's eye view of healthcare, entrepreneurs, and biology per se, not just biotech, but biology as well. This cannot be more significant. I don't think this conversation can be more important at this point of time. It's just critical that we understand where we are and what we can do. For all these startups, I mean, perhaps you can give us a sort of an overview of what you think has been happening the last couple of, say, months or the last year, perhaps.
Thank you. I think it's a very important question. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those aspects. But it's often said that when you're going to split a rock and you're actually hurtling blows at it. So let's say, imagine if the 101st blow splits the rock into two. So the question often is the 101st blow more powerful than all the 100 blows that went in? Or did the 100 blows weaken the stone sufficiently so that the 101st blow, split that into two? So the reason why I'm bringing that up is, if you look at life science entrepreneurship is something like that. So the question is, this is a sector where it's a high risk sector, and the needs and demands are very different. So the question is, how important, what's the kind of importance are we giving to this sector in terms of investment? Are we going to evaluate the returns of life science in the same metric when compared to all other segments? That's very important, because you need all the 100 blows to really, really successfully crack a problem. So life sciences are very different. So I think that is something which, from an investment perspective, people need to understand. But at the same time, the entrepreneurs in life science streams, they're very eager to do something. They want to contribute their knowledge to the general, public health.
True.
But they also need to understand there are 6 important ingredients when they transition from science to an entrepreneurship. So I will quickly take you through, without much further ado, in terms of what are those 6 key ingredients that I've seen from most of the life science companies from different components.
Sure.
So basically, imagine if, the whole, the lights, these are all the lights. Each of the lights is basically a cell that is lighting up in the form of double helix that you can just look at it from a distance. Typically, the quote says, life is a billion cells to be you for a while. It's only for a while. We just have only that much time to be you. And it's basically a group of cells, and it's those cells determine who you are. So that's, at the end of the day, it's actual truth. So very quick background in terms of why, what brings me to this particular topic is the kind of sectors that I've handled, from biodefense to biosilk, all kinds of, including the Formula One racing material, all kinds of products in the past. All of them are high risk, areas. And I've been working in making 2 things. One is naturally unnatural products, basically those that are available in nature, but you produce in more cleaner, greener ways using, bioreactor. And secondly, making unnaturally natural products, which is not available in the nature. Imagine you want to create a fragrance between rose and jasmine. Imagine it's very similar to like creating something totally new. I've been involved with it. Right now, I'm involved with a company that is actually working on programmed or engineered live biotherapeutics for lung cancer. So what it does is basically you don't, give drugs to cure cancer, wherein you actually put genes into a bug. That bug goes inside the lung, stays there for quite some time, and then actually senses the disease, and then actually start, making drugs. It's almost like putting a drug factory inside.
Right.
And, so this is going to change the way in which future works. So the scorecard so far, I've been involved with 7 companies, 3 failures and 3 successes. So that's the kind of scorecard, working on 2 more companies. So it's not a great, I would say journey, but it's a kind of mixed story that I've got so far. And the lessons that I've got from so far is what I wanted to quickly share.
Sure.
So the question is, why is, people often ask me, why is life science a high risk business? That's because it's special and they need special ingredients. Why is it special? Because it's a high risk, high reward sector. But it's also, faced with some of the most formidable challenges that we can see. COVID is just something which is very recent. Let's not forget that in 2009 and 10, there was H1N1 flu that had killed, millions of people there also. But that time, I think travel was not talk about. So I covered that in the the rest of the slide, but I'm just going to leave you with this kind of a funny slide which people can actually see for themselves. In terms of, typically from an academic perspective, people have a perception that my research on based on total inactivity, and I want another 5-year grant. So that's the fun side of the academic side of it. But on the serious commercial note, what is a C cycle, which we call?
But what you say
First,
is very true, Sriram, because this, while COVID is something that is quite new, this is not something that, it's completely off the radar, because you've faced something like this before, although it might have not have been this serious or restrictive. But it's not that we will not face this again in a different form, right? So I think this is these C's will actually tell us how to face forward and sort of generalize it to a lot of other issues that we might come up with, right?
absolutely right, because Mridula, as you know, a government or even a welfare state cannot, take all the responsibility upon itself, and it is upon the, to an extent, large extent, entrepreneurs. If you even see the vaccine makers, at the end of the day, there are innovative, entrepreneurs, brave entrepreneurs who actually help the society. So at the end of the day, that's what is going to be important. And if we are going to encourage the new breed of entrepreneurs, they need to have, from my perception, purely there are six important ingredients. These are something, not everybody is, lucky enough to have all of them, but we can
Right.
actually build upon and we can get a team to do this together. So I'm going to spend, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes in each of this. Typically, this is a structure that people know, but if you put all these 6 C's in the cycle, that's what you get. And that's again a little bit of funny part. It's very important because most of the times, life science researchers, the kind of financial flow is not that much in the early on
Right.
days. So that you can see the rings that I want and the ring that she wants, and the rings that we can afford is all of that you see on the screen there from the
Very
one side.
true.
But beyond the 6C, there is one C that drives life science research fundamentally, be it finding vaccines or be it discovery. What is that C that drives is what is coming up on your screen right now. Basically, the quote says that the one quality in an astronaut more powerful than any other is curiosity. Because at the end
True.
of the day, science is driven by curiosity. They have to get to some place nobody's ever been. Imagine if you're all alone, left, on a strange planet or on a strange object. What are you going to do if things go wrong? Things will go wrong. So curiosity is the one that is going to save you. And the same thing needs to be brought back and applied here at this point of time. So the first C is basically one needs to conceptualize what is the pain point that we are trying to solve. What's the benefit that the patient is getting. More often that we see life science researchers are getting carried away by the technology or the science that they have. I think somewhere the pain points are forgotten. For example, how do we look at a pain point? Can people really visit a healthcare center? Sitting inside a
Yeah.
room or a lab doesn't really help. And
Right.
the most important point is, which people often forget, is what is it that will improve the quality of life? For example, if you look at rare diseases, is one example. Well, COVID is one example of the mass pandemic, but there are also rare diseases for which no pharmaceutical companies have, invested money to find a cure because they're not going to get returns. But these rare diseases are not rare anymore because as human population, increases, these rare diseases are not rare. They are actually, they're becoming more and more common. And again, we need to look at what solution we're going to do. And second is to ideate possibilities. Instead of completely reinventing the wheel, can we quickly look at any cheaper, better, faster methods? And are we going to look at regulatory uncertainties straight away in the beginning in terms of how we are going to shape it around it? For example, drug repositioning is a great way because if you look at in COVID, be it hydroxychloroquine or be it remdesivir, it's basically many times it's repositioning that quickly tries to work around it. Sometimes it may not work, but we have to look at it. That's only a short-term solution, but we also need to look at a long-term solution.
Right.
But of course, the third thing that many researchers do not, do well often in life science that I see is that they do not integrate solutions. Each scientist or each lab, they actually tries to work in a kind of boundary conditions. There's something called seamless research that's often being controlled by the IP landscape, and
Yeah.
because of that, there are limitations. So I think, unlike other fields, imagine Linux operating system came about because it was an open system. So if we have something like an open source kind of integration, IP beyond borders. So that's something which actually also helps work, and one needs to look at what is out there. So that's these are basics in terms of how you conceptualize to solve a problem. The first say I would say. So for example, what
Right.
you see on the screen is that there are different solutions already out there. It's a question of how well we actually license and integrate. That's what matters. And I'll move to the next C. The second one is communicate. Once you conceptualize something, once you know what's the problem you're going to solve, what is out there. We have to look at what are we going to communicate. One question that often comes up is, can scientists sell? So the problem is scientists use one size fits all. It's a kind of standard scientific presentation that I think even their family members really do not, they do not comprehend what the person is trying to work on.
True.
And I think from that perspective, it's important to have different styles of communication to different people. That's something which we do not see much in the life sciences stream. For example, to a patient, we need to use the right language in terms of what's the benefit he or she is going to get. Second is to a funding agency. Very often we see people complain that they do not get the money, but I think they are not communicating to a funding agency in terms of, if it's going to be a philanthropic agency, they want impact. If it's going to be an investor, he wants returns. So what's the kind of communication are they going to communicate? And to the team, again, within the team, many people these days, they do not work just for money, but also in terms of raising their intellectual challenges. That's very important to communicate back to the team. And to collaborators and partners, when we are going to in-license something, when we're going to integrate a technology, it's important in terms of what is it they actually are going to get. Many times, researchers look for research quotient, something that we call in terms of intellectual quotient. How does it expand their horizon of knowledge? That's very important to actually communicate. And to our own families, as I told you before, these entrepreneurs need to explain that what is reasonable, because many times this field actually keeps entrepreneurs and researchers very long hours on the research desk. Yeah. So I think the families need to be reasonable, and that needs a communication, which I don't see many times happening that very often. So the problem is we build too many walls and not enough bridges. So goes the old quote. And interestingly, there are different types of listening too. This again, we have recommended people to be very careful, because in many times in science, they actually look at, let's say, through a microscope or through data. The same kind of activity also goes when you actually listen to a patient complaining of a problem, or let's say a symptom, etc. That's also important, because cells do not speak, but humans do. So, and we have different types of listening. If you really see, there are more than 8 different types of listening. And many times we actually spend time explaining to entrepreneurs, why listening is important and what are those different types of listening. I've just listed 4, but there are 4 more. And each of the listening has got different, capacities. That's very important when you actually communicate, so that it is not a, one-way street.
I completely agree with you, because what happens is, we have this translation of research, right, in most business schools or everywhere else. But the research is actually not communicated to the people who might use it the most. So this kind of communication becomes critical, because what happens is, as you said, as an entrepreneur's life or journey is quite difficult. And the biggest support system usually is their closest family. So what happens is, if the family doesn't understand or is not in on their idea or zeal, you lose some of that support network that you critically need. Especially when you really have developing, say, a proof of concept to put it out there. It's very important. And as you mentioned very clearly, there are these different modes of communication, right? To each person, you communicate in a different way, depending on what you want to communicate to them and what you want from them in return. So you would not pitch it the same way you do to a VC to your family. So this kind of communication, I think, as you clearly mentioned, it's completely lacking in a very large percentage of entrepreneurs. Some of these soft skills, sometimes we don't realize how critical they are, because the science behind what they're doing, or the thought behind what they're doing, is very strong and noble. But if you do not communicate what you want to do, then somewhere along the line you've lost yourself a lot of followers and people who support you. But I think that's critical. In fact, communication, I think, should be of paramount importance to most people.
Absolutely right. Thanks for adding those important points, Mridula. So actually, once they communicate, then the next to see is basically to collaborate. Life science is again something, it's the problems that they're trying to solve is so hard that one person or one team is not able to solve all of this, because you are actually trying to work against, in terms of solving some most difficult challenges that nature is throwing at us. And I think just one sort of team is not going to be good enough to solve a problem. So to collaborate, one needs to look at often, going beyond Google. People think Google is the kind of Bible for all. No, at least the modern researchers, they have to go beyond Google. Many times, things do not get mentioned at all. And one needs to actually look at reaching out to different research centers based on different network. And then you actually build, let's say you go to the first institution, they may actually refer you to the second one. The second one may refer you to the third one, and that's how you build your
Absolutely.
network.
Correct.
And then we have to look at mining the work. This is very important because people many times they actually find ready-made answers. It's not going to be easy. And reading a patent is a skill in itself. It's not just the of course Google patent will give you the headlines, but many times patents are written in such a way that you do not really easily comprehend it. That's the
Correct.
intention, because the idea is to protect your
IB.
invention.
Correct. Correct.
Yes, so one needs to look at what is being done before with the help of other experts in terms of mining the work and then contacting them. And of course, mutual understanding is trust is very important because when you collaborate with people, you need to be upfront in terms of what is the other person going to get, what am I going to get. So that's very important. And I think there is a transparency that needs to set in so that including, for example, recording data in lab notebook. I really find this particular thing is going down. Not many
Right.
people are really systematic. But many times, lab notebooks are important when you actually do many of these readings of data, so that we learned earlier on. So that's very important from this part of the science. Unlike in IT or other streams where this kind of rigor is very different there, because there the documentation post the work is important, but here documentation during the work
During
is
the
also
work.
important because
Correct. Correct.
when you fail, we need to look at it why we failed. So of course, making it work is very important because when we collaborate with people, it's not just signing an agreement. The agreement comes to life only when we periodically interact and then we visit, we talk to the person. So that's very important. So once we collaborate, then the new thing that has come up is co-incubation. Now, to a life science entrepreneur, it's a great time in a way because unlike the previous old times, even 10 years back, they had to set up their own capex, and capex are very expensive to purchase. So here these days you have many of these incubators. There are close to 450 incubators in the country, of which more than 100 are life science incubators in India alone. And these incubators have all the basic research facilities that a life science entrepreneur wants for doing the basic research. Of course, for advanced instrumentation, they can go to research institutions, pay a fee, and get it done. But then,
Right.
they don't need to, unlike other streams, they don't need to, let's say, sign up with one incubator and stay there. You can actually co-incubate yourself in multiple places, just have to pay a small amount of fee as rent. It's not very expensive. Government has subsidized a lot. For
Wow.
example, we have to look at all the incubators. When I talk about 450 incubators and 100 life science incubators, I have not seen very many life science researchers even aware of the kind of incubators that India has and the kind of instrumentation strength that it has got. All of them are waiting to be explored basically, and they're all up for a fee. They don't need to go through the difficult government setup actually. And then we have to layer them based on the cycles of where the company is. For example, if you're making, let's say, a hand sanitizing instrument, or if you're making a vaccine, or if you're making a drug, there are different companies in different stages. Depending upon the stages, these incubators actually help them, including networking, including not just instrumentation, but also in terms of overall functioning of a company. And of course, they actually link them to maximize their exposure so that they're not just restricted to one area, because hiring a business development person or hiring, let's say, a CEO is going to be expensive for these companies, and these incubators actually help them in various ways to run their company. For example, if you look at in the US, you have many of the, or even the global side, you have many different life science clusters. And I think the day is not very far where India is also going to have so many life science clusters there.
So I want to circle back, Shriram, to something that you mentioned earlier about notebooks, at least your lab notebook, right? And the importance of it and how a lot of people don't maintain it. By maintaining your lab notebook, as you correctly said, during your journey, right? So it's almost like a record of the journey. So by maintaining that, it would also help entrepreneurs to circle back and see where they failed last time or where the issue was last time, right? So the correcting the course might become a little easier and perhaps a little more accurate. So isn't that something critical that people should maintain?
Absolutely. That's because the main problem with Mridula is that the ability to write, because we have been sitting in front of the computer, I think the ability to write and document, I think that's that skill of using the hand and the pen, I think that's somehow we are actually forgetting it. But one needs to look at all the documents, graphs, everything. I know maybe people can simply type it on the computer, that's fine, but you can simply take a printout and paste it somewhere, because at the end of the day, physical verification of all of the lab notebooks is important, not only from our perspective, but we often see that in life sciences when there's a litigation, and at some point of time, the judge definitely or the jury is going to ask us the documentation. And that time, many times they actually look at the actual hardcore lab notebooks, because end of the
Right.
day it needs to document. Number two, I often give this example to many of my entrepreneurs whom I actually work with, is that it's a little funny example that if you're going to make upma for the first time, there are every chance that it's not going to really come out the way in which ideally the upma that you see on the screen. So when you really mimic the process, it's a very important thing. Did you really put the right amount of water? Should you add the suji first, or should you add the water first? What goes in first? The different techniques. So when you document it in terms of the quantity, in terms of it, when you repeat it, you know what mistakes you did the earlier time, in terms of you can correct it. So this is just an example, but that's what typically comes into play when you actually do detailed experimentation also.
Absolutely.
So this reason why I'm bringing this slide up is, if you look at Israel, it's a great country to refer as an example. From a life science perspective, or from a life science technology perspective, medical tech perspective, there are different. What you see on the screen is that different. What do you call, so categories are there. For example, you have venture capital, you have accelerators, you have diagnostics, you have cognitive training. All of them is fine, but they do not work in silos. They do not work in compartments. All
Right.
the boxes that you see on the screen, they actually talk to each other. So it's very similar to in terms of how your brain mapping actually happens. So this is very important, because the moment a researcher in life sciences got an idea, he or she makes a decision to transition that into a company, all of this ecosystem is accessible like in a dashboard point of view to the researcher
Right.
or an entrepreneur. I think the next stage, India is evolving that to get to here. That right now, for example, the point that I told you, that the 450 incubators, people may not know, but I think at some point there will be a website or something where it will be accessible. But of course, it's important that all of them talk to each other, so that hospital needs to talk to, let's say, a research institution, and that in turn needs to talk to scientists, and so on and so forth.
True.
So the next C is basically capitalize, because this is the most important C in terms of funding a business. So the question is, we need to look at whom we are going to ask for funds. Many times we think it's only the investor. That's not true. If, let's say, the problem we are trying to solve, if it interests another large company, or even other, let's say, slightly even bigger company, so many times we often also can take them into confidence. You can also look at them, because many times large companies also do have some small number of funds allocated,
Mm-hmm.
because many of these large companies, they are not good at R&D themselves, because one needs to be agile in doing R&D, as you rightly mentioned a little earlier on. So small companies can take those risks. So once these companies have got some idea, they can also reach out to the large companies. There are two advantages there. One is not only that they can fund you the research, but they can also take you the entire invention all the way to the clinical trial and into the product domain, and you can be part of it. So of course, there are some downsides in terms of the values and rewards, because they would actually take most of it, because they're also taking
True.
risks. But many times, one needs to have a trade-off. But when compared to a financial investment, that is also a possibility, which I think people need to look at it. And many times people are also not looking at the global listing avenues, because in India, it's very difficult to list companies that are not profitable. And life science, it will take a long, many years to actually make something profitable. So, for example, we recommend many secondary listing markets to raise money once we have some good amount of patents that are actually published and awarded. And and then the third important avenues are also key, because there are family offices, large investors, high net worth individuals have come up. They are a little above angels, and these people can actually fund. They can actually, the chunk of life science research work that is high risk. So, but again, researchers may not be aware that these things do exist from a funding perspective.
Very true.
So, for example, just to bring about the point that Novartis itself has got works with other clusters. For example, you'll see large pharma companies on the screen, be it Eli Lilly, AbbVie, Novartis, Johnson and Johnson, Pfizer. Each of them, they actually work with smaller companies. They actually get stake in those companies, and then they actually network the technology. So you can see the kind of huge map that they actually build on it. And the last to see on my slide is basically contracting it out. So obviously, when it comes to scale up, and when you think about manufacturing, startup cannot do itself. So they need to look at the in terms of what kind of agencies to contract out. Whether do they have the know-how, whether they have the capacity, and is it as part of the budget? Many times contracting out is going to be expensive, but
Yeah.
many of these contracting companies actually are willing to get into a deal in terms of looking at potential upside later on once the product is launched, and do not charge the startups early on. So these are some possibilities that are out there. And for example, just in the contract, many times it so happens that the contracting companies themselves are part of the large firms, and they can actually be bought out also. So in fact, if people are going to start about just in terms of contracting company, that itself could actually lead to value. So that's, viewers can zoom here later on, and then they can read the text on the screen. And so from my perspective, there are limitless possibilities at this point of time. The reason why I'm putting up this picture is to let my entrepreneurs know is that this is a visual rendering of you standing on a surface of Titan, which is Saturn's moon, and you see Saturn on the sky, you see Sun, remotely there. But what is so called the liquid is not water, but basically it's basically liquid methane. So the reason why I'm bringing
Wow.
this up is, if you can have imagination, if you can really open up your mind, there are a lot of things that one can do. And just to conclude, this is a famous quote that I think many people in the government are also talking about: "Night is darkest before the dawn, and let's wake up for the dawn." So thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sriram. I mean, this was very educative because it's really amazing to see, say, for example, in the Novartis, right? Example, they have formed such a large network. They're actually reaching out to people one company might not have ever thought of reaching out to. So it's just through these extended networks that you can bring in a lot more, not only capital, but a lot of IP, a lot of knowledge that you might not have, or any of your partners don't have. So is that
Yes.
fundamentally missing in a lot of entrepreneurs right now? Do you see that kind of networking, or building on others' capabilities? Google Scholar has this beautiful thing, standing on the shoulders of giants. But is that something really missing, at least in the Indian entrepreneurial side?
That is actually happening in other than life science domain. Even, for example, the medtech domain, the medical devices domain,
Right.
it's actually happening. The bioengineering, engineering side is fine. But if you look at the science side of it, that's fundamentally because of the IP reasons, because they're being trained right from early on in their training to keep things, to themselves. For example, you're not even permitted to draw a structure on the board, and when visitors come, you're supposed to erase them off. Because of the IP, safeguard, they have been brought up in a very different culture. So I think somewhere they have to be practiced in terms of how do you disclose information under a confidentiality agreement, and how do you really engage the other person. And that again boils down to communicating the core of what problem they're trying to solve. As long as that excites people, people would enter into a confidentiality agreement, then they would open up and they can talk. I think that's something needs to be fostered, at least in the life science ecosystem, the research ecosystem so far that I've seen.
And how do you feel, it's amazing that you mentioned so many incubation clusters. For people who have been in this field for a while, a lot of them might not even be aware of these. So how do you think this kind of information can be brought out? Because it can't be done one entrepreneur at a time. That is too slow and that is too inefficient. How do you feel this kind of information can be spread fast, so that people who have no idea that these clusters even exist can actually reach out to them? These seem to be like gold mines, right?
Actually, that's a very important question, Mridula. Right now, I think what central government is trying to do is using this Atal innovation clusters.
Right.
They're trying to spread the information right in the early stage in terms of the schools and colleges itself. And I think this BIRAC from Government of India, Department of Biotechnology, they are doing a great service in terms of those clusters. But having said that, from a large majority of life science researchers, they are still not aware of many of these things.
True.
So the possibility is, in terms of many times when they come forward, I think there should be a kind of a network like LinkedIn. Equivalent to LinkedIn is a kind of sea at large, where these people could talk to each other, at least connect that something's out there. I have not seen those things exist. I have seen similar things exist for other other streams, but not so from life science, at least Indian life science perspectives. I think that's lacking right now.
But you could still form perhaps groups on LinkedIn. That does not help when you
That's
form
because
specific.
again, the main problem is from an IP, perspective. It restricts
Ah.
people to talk in terms of what There's only as much information that you can put out, and that really doesn't excite people of other interests to collaborate. So we have to find out an innovative. That again is it's a problem that we need to solve. And it requires an innovative solution to bring these people on board into a network.
But that's a good problem to solve, because we
Yes.
seem to have a lot on both sides. So we just need to
Yes.
connect, find the bridge. Yes?
Yes.
No, but this is
Yes.
fascinating. And thank you for taking us into such a clear I also not only see this as a clear elucidation of healthcare at this particular point of time, but I also think as a general rule, I think these should be your go-to sort of rule book, right? It's not just
Yes.
in COVID times or in times of stress or issues. At the time when everybody wants to jump onto the bandwagon, but it also seems to make some sense. Like this should be something that you have taken as part of your entrepreneurial journey, and especially for healthcare, given the fact that IP is definitely a bargaining chip in some places, but also a fence in others. I think the communication or reaching out, finding your clusters and forming your network, I think seems to be very critical as a go-to policy as well.
Absolutely. Actually, Mridula, if you really see, the name of your program, which you see in the background of your screen, is Threading Thoughts.
Thoughts.
Now, there are two interpretations to it. One is we need to have a lot of threads. We have to thread our thoughts internally, but it's also important, like pulling a chariot. We need to have, chariot. If you can compare chariot to a large problem in life science, you need many minds to thread their thoughts, integrate it together. Only then you'll be able to pull. A single person, it's very difficult. That's why you see that the chariot has also got these two important threads.
Correct.
The big threads, and you need multiple hands to lay on, and then as a teamwork, pull the chariot forward.
I don't think my logo could have been explained more beautifully, but it is so spot on because when I first thought of it, that was what I was thinking. Not only do I thread my thoughts, but I also require people to pull it wherever I want them to pull it, right? So every
Correct.
person I talk to is actually pulling it in a direction that I want to go in. So I don't think I could have even got a more beautiful energy or a way of putting it together. So thank you for that as well. But thank you so much, Sriram. It's been amazing talking to you, and just the clarity and the simplicity with which you explained it. It's sort of easy for a lot of laymen and entrepreneurs, as well as people on different aspects, right? All the different stakeholders. I think all of them can really understand where we need to come together and collaborate. So it's been so enlightening talking to you, and thank you so much for sparing time.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful talking to you, Mridula, and let's actually catch up another time. Thank you.
Absolutely.